remember to record this week.
Mm-hmm.
Every week in progress. The problem with recording is I might now have to start editing. That's a whole job.
Oh. Kids log and benefits.
So tomorrow,
Mm-hmm.
Meijer starts their home delivery
Yeah,
service.
right. There's something on TV.
So with Meijer and Whole Foods and Costco
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
all doing home delivery, I don't officially have to go grocery shopping anymore. Everywhere I go, and One Stop does delivery also.
Yeah.
You email your order.
Mm-hmm.
So all the grocery stores that I go to
They're all
now do home delivery.
And it's like, okay, as long as you pay for their monthly fee, which is cheap,
Yeah.
it sort of makes more sense to use your time better doing something else than
So
driving.
the Meijer's fee, the way they're doing it, is $99 upfront for the year.
Right.
And if you subscribe, then they give you $25 off your first order. So it's really $74 for the year.
Right.
Which
Which
I'm pretty sure you'd eat that up in gas just starting your car twice.
Yeah.
Once
The
a
question is, I thought there was a nominal
$35 order, minimum order.
minimum, but
Free delivery.
as long as it's free to, because one of them I thought had like a $6 delivery charge.
So Google Express, which is the one for Costco and Whole
Right.
Foods,
Mm-hmm.
they also have a minimum order. So they do have a nominal fee if you go under the minimum order.
That's what it probably is. If
Yeah.
it's below a certain amount, then you pay.
But if you,
above it,
I think it's $25. If you order $25 worth of stuff, then the shipping is free.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I haven't seen yet what it's a partnership between Meijer and Shipt,
Mm-hmm.
and they're saying that you have the whole store, which is not the case with Google Express. You have a
Right.
kind of a limited menu
Yeah.
of Whole Foods and Costco
Right.
stuff.
It's what's funny too is that for some people, if you go in like once a week, you're normally going to hit those numbers.
Right.
Peg hates shopping, so she'll shop Monday, and then she'll get something else that she needs Wednesday, and something else that she might need Thursday or Friday, and it's sort of like that we must have 15 different charges at the end of the month, and it's sort of like some of them would be below. On the other hand, if somebody else is actually doing it, then we probably would do them all one time.
All right. It's 7:30. Get started. Okay, so tonight's class is from Parshas Ki Tetzei, and Ki Tetzei is one of the most rich in mitzvah parshas that there is. Now, what I mean by that is, there you go. So that can't be noise. What I mean by that is, there's 613 total commandments in the Torah. The tradition is that we have 613 commandments. Now, according to the counts, we typically, when we give these counts, we'll go according to Maimonides' Sefer Mitzvahs. And then, if you layer the Sefer Chinuch on Maimonides' Sefer Mitzvahs, you know exactly which Torah portions they fall out in. So, out of the 613 total commandments in the entire 5 books of Moses, 74 mitzvahs are in this week's Torah portion.
Wow.
Which means
Percentage.
12% of all the mitzvahs in the entire Torah are found in this week's Torah portion. So it's filled with mitzvahs. Now, of this large collection of mitzvahs in this week's Torah portion, the one that we're going to focus on tonight is the mitzvah that govern the institution, let's call it, of marriage, right? And who wants to be institutionalized? As the joke goes. Now we're going to talk about the laws that govern marriage as well as divorce. That's tonight's topic. And what we're going to try to understand is the metaphorical dimension of marriage as it applies to God and the soul, and how there's this relationship of marriage between the God and the soul. And some of the interesting questions which arise from this week's Torah portion, how it introduces the mitzvahs of marriage and divorce, will help us better understand this relationship that the soul has with God. Okay, so jumping right in, we have You see that little
Yeah.
box, yeah.
cloud that said the screen sharing is paused?
Mm-hmm.
I guess if you could send me a quick chat from home, do you still see the screen? Because on our end it said that the screen sharing was paused. Do you still see it at home, the bouquet of flowers and the Torah study slide? I can see it. Okay, good. Thank you. So,
Yes. Okay.
moving along. In the Torah portion, here's the context in this week's Parsha where we find the mitzvah. It's in chapter 24 of the book of Dvarim, verses 1 through 4. And the verses read in the English translation, when a man takes a wife and is intimate with her, and it happens that she does not find favor in his eyes because he discovers in her an unseemly and an immoral matter, and he writes for her a bill of divorce and places it into her hand and sends her away from his house. So the verses continue. It says, and she leaves his house and goes and marries another man. If the second husband hates her and writes her a bill of divorce and places it into her hand and sends her away from his house, or if the latter husband, the second one who took her as a wife, dies, then her first husband who sent her away may not take her again to be his wife. Since she was defiled to him, for that is an abomination before the Lord, you shall not bring sin into the land the Lord your God gives you for an inheritance. We have these 4 verses, and within these 4 verses, it appears that the topic primarily is divorce. And we learn kind of how divorce works in the sense that once you're divorced, if there's a marriage which happens after the divorce, you can't get remarried according to Torah law.
Remarried to the first person or remarried at all?
Right, remarried to the first person.
Right.
Yeah, a woman could get married over and over again, but once she marries someone in between, a former husband, she can no longer go back to the former husband. Now, what's interesting, though, is while it obviously on the surface is dealing with the laws of divorce here in these verses, the Talmud learns much of the laws in regards to marriage from these verses. Again, if you would look at text 1 closely and you say, well, is it obvious that the laws of marriage are found in these verses? Maybe it's explicitly dealing with remarriage and limitations on remarriage, but what we're going to see soon in the next few texts is that the Talmud actually derives many of the laws for even first marriages from these verses, these 4 short verses in this week's Torah portion. Now, one example of the laws that are derived in regards to marriage from these verses is in regards to the ways that we can go about accomplishing a marriage, right? Mm-hmm. So, and now in the United States, what do you need to get married? For it to be official, you need a marriage license, mm-hmm. right? So that's and there are certain procedures depending on the state that you have to go through in order to have an official marriage license, right? Mm-hmm. My marriage license is from the state of New Jersey, and there was necessary witnesses and paperwork, and you had to file and these different things. There's certain steps you have to go through to get married. So in Judaism, it's no different. There are certain steps you have to go through, and there are certain ways that certain things that must be done in order to make the marriage official. Now, one of the ways to make a marriage official is through an exchange of money. It's almost like a form of acquisition. You acquire a married state. So I believe, in a certain sense, a lot of that takes place even on a secular way. You have to purchase the marriage license. So there's some form of exchange and a certain acquisition to reach this married state. So these details of the law that marriage can be affected or made official through money is derived from these verses. Let's see how that's the case, how the Talmud learns this. Now, before we see how the case is exactly inside the Talmud text, I'm going to introduce a principle, try to explain the principle of Torah law, of deriving Torah law from scriptural verses. there are many methods that the sages use, and one method is called Gezerah Shava. Now, Gezerah Shava means like equal. So it's an equal verse. A Gezerah is like Gezerah Kosi, we say, is like a statement of the verse. So Gezerah Shava is an equal statement. So the way this method works is that if you have two different contexts, two different sections of the Torah, and within each of the two sections there is the exact same word in both sections. So what that means is that by use of those two words, that one word in two contexts, it links the topics so that we could derive lessons or ideas or parameters from one context and then apply them to the other. So by having an equal term, you now link the ideas and you can learn one from the other. Now, it's an important idea, it's an important qualifier to put forward, is that Gezerah Shava is not something that gives creative license to people looking to derive laws from the Torah. Gezerah Shava works because it's part of the oral tradition that we have from Moshe on Mount Sinai. And certain things are passed down by tradition, and a way of supporting the tradition or linking the tradition to the text is these methods, Gezerah Shava. So meaning, Gezerah Shava is not a license to go start making things up by just finding similar words throughout the text. Okay, so let's see how this Gezerah Shava works. So text number 2 is from Tractate Talmud Kedushin. So this is the tractate that is dedicated to the marriage. Kedushin is the word for a marriage. So you have a whole tractate dedicated to Kedushin. And so the very first page of the Gemara, which is, if you look up there closely, all Gemaras start on page 2. So it's actually the first page of the Gemara is page 2, and then you have the two sides. So this is the first page. On the first side of the page, we're starting from the very beginning of the tractate. So what does the Mishnah say at the top of the page on page 2? It says, a woman is betrothed in one of 3 ways. Now, we're not going to give all 3 ways here for tonight, but one way that we actually give you a list, with money, with a contract, and with intimate relations. Now, the Talmud asks, what is the scriptural basis for betrothal through money? Where does this come from that you can marry through money? The Gemara answers, we derive it by means of Gezerah Shava. And what's the Gezerah Shava? We compare the word kach, or take. So we compare the word take to the take that appears regarding Abraham's purchase of the Marta Machpelah, the Machpelah cave in the field of Ephron. You go back to the book of Genesis, the book of Bereshis, Parshas Chayas Sarah. After Sarah passes away, then Abraham goes and looks for a place to bury her. So the whole narrative of this exchange, this negotiation of buying the burial plot, the cave, we see the term kach, that Abraham took the field. So it's written here at the beginning, if we go back to text number 1, ki yikach ish isha. When a man takes a wife, it's the exact same term of kach. So kach v'kach is our Gezerah Shava, that just like over there it's done with money, so too here in the area of Kedushin, the area of marriage, it's done through money. This is our Gezerah Shava, and so the Talmud finds a verse concerning the sale of the field, and when the Torah uses the word take, and it's describing an acquisition process. So too, when the Torah is describing marriage, on our parsha, text number 1 for tonight, the Torah also uses the word kach, take. So by applying this method of Gezerah Shava, the Talmud is able to deduce that just like in the case of the field, it was taken by means of giving money, so too here, in the case of a marriage, it is made whole, it's made official through the use of money. Now, this is just one example of many where the sages are able to derive laws of marriage, how to do marriage, from the verses in this week's Torah portion. Now, what's puzzling is that seemingly the Torah is not talking about marriage at all, right? Again, if we go back to text number 1, what's the Torah talking about in text number 1? It's talking about divorce.
Right.
So there's no explicit mention of marriage and its details, how to do it, in the Torah, seemingly. All of the laws are derived or deduced from the context, which is talking explicitly about divorce. We would expect it to be different. You know, if you think chronologically, you can't get divorced unless you're married.
It's sort of like reverse engineering.
Yeah, exactly. It's reverse engineering. Divorce comes after marriage. So you would expect the Torah to first establish that there's a mitzvah to get married, and which is, by the way, it's a whole separate debate if there's even a mitzvah to get married, or if it's just a way to do something else, which is a mitzvah. But we'll leave that on. But you would expect the Torah to explain this is how you get married, and once you've explained how you get married, then after that's established, then we talk about divorce. But no, the Torah talks about divorce and then buries in a coded message, so to say, all the rules of getting married within the context of getting divorced. So that's our first question, which is, why does the Torah dedicate so many verses to the concept of divorce and slip in marriage,
like an afterthought.
Like an afterthought or incognito. So that's our first question. Again, our whole point is that if we do this analysis of marriage and divorce, we're going to come to a much deeper message, which is how to understand the relationship of God and the soul. But we first have to kind of sort some things out. In this week's Torah portion, why does marriage get hidden within the verses of divorce? Now, this week's Torah portion is not the only time where we see something like this happens. Now, what I mean by that is that we have, after the canonization of the Bible, after you bring all the books together in the Torah, the next major development in the Jewish library is the codification of Jewish law. Now, I mentioned earlier tonight that Moses received on Mount Sinai an oral tradition. So we have what's called the Torah Shebiksav, the written Torah. That's the 5 books of Moses, together with the books of the prophets, and the books of the writings. That's what we call the Torah Shebiksav, the written Torah. Now, part of the reception, part of the getting this written Torah came an oral tradition as well that Moshe handed down, and from generation to generation it was transmitted from those who had received it from the previous generation to the next. Now, the next big addition after the written Torah is what we call the Torah Shebal Peh. The oral Torah was written down for the first time. Now, the first major work in writing down the oral tradition is what we call the Mishnah. Now, Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, he's the one who led this project of putting together all of the oral tradition in the form of a book, the form of the Mishnah. And what Rebbe does is he organizes the information of the Mishnah into what we call 6 Sidorim, or Sheish Sidorim. If you've ever heard the term Shas to describe the Talmud, you ever heard nowadays you might have heard of it also as a political party in Israel, the Shas. But Shas, as an acronym, stands for Shisha Sidrei Mishnah, or Shisha Sidorim. The Shas is for Shisha, 6, and then Seder with the Samech makes Shas. So the first organizing principle of the oral tradition is to put all the information into 6 Sidorim. Now, a Seder, how does a Seder work? You have certain bodies of knowledge, certain groups of mitzvahs. So, for instance, one big group of mitzvahs is the agricultural laws. all the laws that govern how to raise and use the produce in the Holy Land, the land of Israel. So that is the first Seder, and it falls under the general category of what we call Zroyim, or plantings. So that's the first Seder, and it covers all the things, like you have to leave the field or the corner of your field for the poor. You can't mix seeds together. So you have kolayim, all of these different things. You have to give a tenth of the produce to the tribe of Levi. So you have Meiser. And so all of these different topics that have to do with the agricultural laws all are nicely into what we call the Seder of Zroyim.
Would that include like animal things like you can't have an ox and a donkey plowing together?
Right.
So that's considered
That's
agriculture.
in Kalayim as well, exactly. They can't pull the plow, this mix. Now, you move on, you have all the different holidays. So that's another big topic, right? We have Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and we have Sukkot and Pesach, and we have Shabbos. So these things are we call, the holidays are called Moed, the times. Then you have things like marital law. So you have Noshim. This is for women. The laws. I'm back, I hope. Can everyone hear me?
It's back.
Call got dropped. Okay, Justin hears me. Good. Thank you very much. I'm going to shrink this and go back to this. So going back to what we were saying, so the Mishnah is organized into 6 Siddharim, and we were going through the examples. So we left off with Kodshim, so all the laws of ritual purity. That falls into sacrifices. Those make the last 2 orders. Kodshim is sacrifices, and Teheres is all the ritual purity laws.
Is mikvah part of purity or part of women?
Purity.
Purity.
Yeah. Okay, so that's your first organizing principle, Siddharim. And all the topics that fit under a general category go into a particular Seder. Once you then organize by Siddharim, the 6 Siddharim, then you break it down further by what's called a Masechta, or you see many times in our note, it's called a tractate.
Right.
So each Seder is made up of multiple tractates.
Sort of like chapter.
Chapter.
I was going to say paragraph. Well, it's not paragraphs, so it's multiple paragraphs.
Like
so it's
subtopics.
Right.
So if you have general topics like agriculture,
Right.
you have subtopics within agriculture, and the subtopic would then be the tractate or the Masechta. Within a tractate, then you have the full treatment of a given subtopic, where you're broken up into chapters. So a chapter in Mishnah is called a parak.
Okay.
A parak. And then within each parak, within each chapter, you have Mishnayos. You have a Mishnah, and the plural is Mishnayot, or Mishnayos. So you have Seder, Masechta, Parak, Mishnah. And that's how the oral tradition was organized by Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi when he put together the Mishnah. So I gave this little detour to explain the organizing because we have the same fascinating question about marriage and divorce. We have a similar type question when it comes to the Mishnah. See, the way Rebbe organized the Seder of Noshim, so dealing with the laws of the family, he also put tractate Gittin, the tractate that deals with divorce, in front of the tractate that deals with Kiddushin, marriage. So if you're reading through the Mishnah, trying to learn all the laws of getting divorced come before the laws of getting married. He puts them the same puzzling type of thing. You would think if you're going to go in order of the oral tradition, you would first learn how to get married before you learn how to get divorced. But no, going through the Mishnah, you have the exact same question, or at least a similar question to this week's Torah portion is, why should it come like this? Shouldn't marriage come before divorce? So let's see text 3. Maimonides asks this question, and he gives an answer. He says, why did Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, Rabbi Yehuda the Prince, arrange tractate Kiddushin so late in the Seder, so late in the order? It really belongs even before tractate Ketubot. Now what's a Ketubah? Ketubah is a marriage contract. So you have to have an institution of marriage, a mitzvah to get married, before you get into the details of the documents. So certainly marriage should come forward before the marriage document rules. At the very least, it should certainly be before tractate Gittin, which is following logical progression of marriage and only afterwards divorce. Gittin is the plural of get, and a get is a divorce document. So if ketubah is what makes you married, a get is the document that makes you divorced. So ketubah is already, maybe there's a way to talk about that before. Kiddushin doesn't make sense, but it's not as bad as getting divorced before you get married. This is Rambam's question. So Rambam gives the first answer for tonight that we'll see. The answer is that Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi was following the verse, which discusses divorce before marriage. That's why I said it's a similar question, because Rambam's essentially answering it from this week's Torah portion. Rambam's answering this puzzle by saying, that's how Hashem did it. Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi has a good precedent, because that's exactly how Hashem did it. In Parsha Kitetse, in the book of Devarim, first God talks about divorce, and buried in there you can extract all the laws from marriage. The Mishnah follows the Torah's order. Now, there's a couple more answers we'll present tonight to explain why this is. So this next answer is from the Yesod HaMishnah, which is a work which is coming to explain the Mishnah, a commentary on the Mishnah. And here the idea, in summary, is that you organize putting all the bigger Masechtas first, meaning size matters and precedence. And if you have a bigger book, that should go first. And as the books get smaller, that's the way the order should be determined.
Wow.
You determine order by size of the Masechta. All right, so let's see that inside. Text number 4, the English translation reads, when thinking about it, the order of the Mishnah is quite logical. Right? If the topics are out of sequence, still there is a logical way for organizing it. What's the logic? It's based on the rule that what is larger is placed first. Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi placed the tractates with more chapters before the smaller ones. And this principle will help explain why certain tractates were placed after others when logic would seemingly dictate that they should be placed prior. Such as Rosh Hashanah comes after Yuma, which discusses Yom Kippur. So if you look on a calendar, Rosh Hashanah comes before Yom Kippur. But if you look in the Mishnah, Yom Kippur comes before Rosh Hashanah. But now that we know, and Sukkah comes after both of them on the calendar, but Rosh Hashanah comes after all of them in the Mishnah. This is a question the Reb Sharira Gaon was asked. So if we now use the principle that whichever is bigger comes first, that's what helps us understand the deviations from seemingly chronological order. And this also explains, the Mishnah answers, this also explains why Kiddushin is after Gittin, as Maimonides was troubled with in our previous text. This principle holds true in the order of Nashim without exception. First comes Tractate Yevamot with 15 chapters. Next is Ketubot with 13 chapters. Then Nedarim with 11. Nazir comes next with 9. Then Sota with 9 as well. Then also with 9. And it concludes with Kiddushin which only has 4 chapters. So even though the whole principle of marriage, you'd think Kedushin comes first, but since we have this principle, whatever is larger as a Masechta goes first, Kedushin, the first in chronological order, is the last in presentation because of its relatively small size. That's the second answer. So the first answer of the Rambam is that Hashem's presentation of the Torah was a precedent. The second answer of the Yesod Mishnah was it's all organized by size of Masechta. The last answer, which we'll see, is from the Yosef Da'as, explaining Tractate Gittin, where it's more of a homiletic answer. Now, here the idea is kind of like a secret to being satisfied. If people feel trapped or compelled, it's hard for them to ever get comfortable with their situation. And there's a certain despair which comes psychologically and mentally from feeling trapped. But if you get yourself into something and you know that you have an out, the out provides a certain relief that will help you from being in despair, and instead force you to try to make the most out of something because you know you can get out of it. That's the answer. Let's see inside. It says homiletically, it can be said that the Gittin before Kedushin conveys a message to the prospective bride and groom. There's always an open door to absolve this relationship, and your freedom is not forever taken from you. This very knowledge actually helps assure the stability and lasting chance of the marriage. So by having an out means that you'll make the effort to that it should work. So it's a little counterintuitive, but it's a fascinating insight into like the human psychology of despair and of effort. All right, so quick review of what we've covered so far. So we have this recurring phenomenon, right? That marriage comes after divorce. In the Mishnah, the tractate of divorce comes before marriage, and this, according to Maimonides, was just Rabbi Yehuda Nasi's way of following the Torah's lead, because the Torah speaks explicitly about divorce and only hides in a coded way all the laws about marriage within the topic of divorce. So the same way divorce came first in its reading of the Torah, so too in the Mishnah it's organized that way. Now, the question we had other answers. We have this about size and about this homiletic lesson, about human nature, but we have this question as to why does the Torah choose to focus on divorce and only sneak the laws of marriage in after, or treat it as a smaller topic altogether. So in the next section, we're going to begin to compare we're going to answer this question by understanding the topic on a more like a mystical, a more Hasidic dimension. All right. Now, the idea going forward, the Hasidic idea, is that everything in the Torah can be understood and appreciated on multiple levels. Right? So tonight's topic is marriage. And marriage, if I would tell you what is marriage,
it's a bride and groom.
The bride and groom. Okay? So you have this arrangement between two people, and it's a human thing, right? If you would ask you, can you marry? First marriage, I was actually, I say it's a human thing, and I laugh because the first marriage I was ever part of, I think it was kindergarten when Q married the letter U. You guys ever have this in school, or any of your kids have this? It was like the Q and U are always together. So in like early reading lessons, we acted out Q marrying letter U. So it's like, okay, but really, normally we don't think about marriage as two letters. We think of marriage as a human institution where two people get married, right? A husband and a wife. Now, what we saw in the first section of tonight's class is that marriage is a mitzvah in the Torah. While it's maybe not explicit, which we're trying to figure out, it's still a whole section of Mishnah, a whole body of laws telling us how to get married. So on the surface, this is a human thing. It's between two people. But what the principle is that everything in Torah, marriage included, can be understood on multiple levels. So when you start learning teachings of Chassidus and teachings of Kabbalah, you begin to appreciate that there are many more levels, many more layers of depth and meaning beyond the simple understanding. And this is one of the key teachings of Jewish mysticism, is that really the correct perspective, according to Jewish mystical teachings, is turned completely upside down. Meaning, the Torah is not talking about marriage between people primarily. That's a secondary understanding. What I mean by that is, hold on. Text 6. So look at text 6. Text 6 is from a book called the Asar Maimaros. It's a Kabbalistic work written by an Italian rabbi. And in the Asar Maimaros, he says, we can draw this conclusion regarding the entire Torah. It essentially speaks in the upper spheres, El Yonim, and only hints to the lower worlds in a secondary manner. See, a lot of times, the way we learn Torah, we say, oh, divorce? This week's Parsha? That's talking about divorce between two people. That's the main way to understand it. That it could be understood spiritually, that's a secondary way of learning. That's interesting. But really, if you'd ask me, what's the Torah talking about? It's talking about divorce between two people, right? So along comes the Asar Maimaros, along comes the approach of Kabbalistic teachings and says, no, you've got it backwards. When you learn this week's Torah portion, it talks about divorce, it's primarily talking about spiritual matters. The fact that you could understand it also in regards to human affairs, that's a secondary way of understanding it. That's usually the exact opposite of how we would learn the Torah, right? Mm-hmm. But a fundamental approach of Jewish mysticism is that we've got it all wrong. Mm-hmm. Really, the primary thing is the spiritual understanding. Second, by the way, it also happens to be talking about people. Now, yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry. So going back to track 1, so this is God and the Jewish people. The Jewish people leave God. They go someplace else, but they can't come back to God.
Right. If they take another husband, then God doesn't tolerate that abomination, and that hurts. That makes the marriage forbidden.
But even if they leave him or her, or
yeah. Now when you say leave, I'm glad you're bringing this up. Do a close reading. Is that what it says? That the woman could just leave?
No, sends her away.
There you go. But keep that. We're going to address that more fully soon. Yeah. But it's very good. It's an excellent question that you asked, because if you brought in quick, if we understand this is really talking about spiritual matters, and then it's only by the way you're addressing human affairs. So what are the spiritual matters? You got right to the heart of it and asked a good question.
Because it doesn't always have to be, like a God. It could be something like your work or
right.
Your involvement, and if you repent and.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. Now, another idea. So besides flipping upside down the way we learn Torah, that really is talking about spiritual matters, and just by the way, a secondary approach is that it's talking about physical matters. But another fundamental teaching in Chassidus and Kabbalah is that all of physical existence has a spiritual counterpart or a spiritual source, which is the life force for that physical existence, right? So I've used this example before in previous classes. We're sitting here around the table. This table is a physical existence in this world. Now, there is a spiritual counterpart to this physical table in the higher realms. And not just that it's a counterpart, but that counterpart is actually the source for there to be a table in this world. Everything that exists in this world is really a manifestation of a higher spiritual source. So now that we've not only turned the topic of marriage and divorce upside down and saying that it's primarily talking about spiritual matters, just secondarily it's talking about here these human institutions, but now the very existence of the concept or the idea of marriage and divorce is really a result of a spiritual counterpart. There's a spiritual counterpart on high, which is the cause for the whole concept of marriage and divorce to exist here on earth. So that's our question. Our question then is how do we discover, where do we find the answer for what this spiritual counterpart is? What is the mystical dimension of marriage and divorce? Tanya, you got right to it. And we mentioned it at the beginning. It's the dynamic of God and the soul, with God as the husband and the soul as the wife. So that's what we see in text number 7 from Midbar Rabbah. It's explaining, it says, what is the intent of the verse when it mentions in a phrase referring to God the day that he got married? So this is talking about the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai. This was a marriage with the Jewish people. So we have our marriage, we have our husband, we have our bride, and this is our spiritual counterpart, which is the source for there to be a concept of marriage and divorce here on earth. Now, we have a famous book of the Torah, which gives us an allegory of a husband and a wife, a beautiful love story between a man and a woman. It's the book of Shir HaShirim, the Song of Songs, written by King Solomon, Shlomo HaMelech. And this husband and wife, this man and woman that's described in Shir HaShirim, is really an allegory for the love of God and his lover, the Jewish people. Now, the Alter Rebbe builds on this idea that's taught by Shlomo HaMelech and Shir HaShirim, and explains that even the words themselves for bride and groom are instructive to help us understand the relationship between God and the soul. So what's the word for bride in Hebrew? The word for bride in Hebrew is a kala. Kala. So the word kala is connected, as Alter Rebbe will explain, to the word kalsa. If you add one letter, then it changes kala, bride, to kalsa, which means yearning for. So this yearning hinted at, and the word for bride, is hinting to the nature of the yearning of the Jewish soul for God. That's text number 8. This is from Likutei Torah, which is the Chassidus of the Alter Rebbe, the first Rebbe of Chabad. It's from his explanations on the book of Shir HaShirim, there on the first page of the Maimarim explaining Shir HaShirim. So the English translation reads, the Song of Songs, which is Solomon's, states, let him kiss me with the kisses of his mouth, for your love is better than wine. So Alter Rebbe explains, it is known that God is called the groom, and the Jews are the bride, namely due to the downward flow of Torah from God to the Jews. That's what we said before in the Medrash. The giving of the Torah was this wedding. So God is the groom or the bride, and it all happened through the giving of the Torah. Our sages stated, Matan Torah was God's wedding day. Now there are two interpretations for the word kala. It can be related to the word kiloyon, expiration, as in something that is all-consuming. And the second interpretation is that it comes from the expression, my soul yearns, kalsa, for God. That's the connection etymologically of kala to kalsa. So kala, my soul yearns, this is the strong desire of the soul to cleave and be united in the infinite light of God. So as if we turn the verses upside down, it's really talking about spiritual matters first. We have to understand what are these spiritual matters and ratchet it up even more intensely by saying these spiritual matters are the source of the existence of these physical matters. So when we look for the spiritual matters that marriage and divorce is talking about, we go to the marriage of God and the soul of the Jewish people, husband and the wife. And the Alter Rebbe is explaining this wife, the soul yearns to be connected, yearns for the bond with the husband, with God. Now let's flip it back to the other way. We're going to keep spinning around like in circles, going deeper and deeper with our explanation. So we flip back the other way. We have marriage between husband and wife in Jewish tradition on earth, right, between people. So it's called Kiddushin. So there's a famous kind of analysis of the nature of Kiddushin by a rabbi who is known as the Rogachover Gaon, Rabbi Yosef Rosen. Rabbi Yosef Rosen was one of the rabbis who gave ordination to the Lubavitcher Rebbe. And there's a famous correspondence between the Rogachover Gaon and the Lubavitcher Rebbe on many topics in Jewish law. So one topic where we have writings from the Rogachover Gaon is in the nature of the mitzvah of marriage. Now, the question is marriage something that happens once, and once it's occurred, it's a state that is static? Or is marriage something which is happening continuously? It's dynamic. Does it happen once and now it's a fixed state, or is it a constantly recurring event? Now, it's a deep treatment that the Rogachover gives, but in the solution, he says that marriage is actually something which is constantly happening new all the time. It's a constantly renewing and reoccurring event. So there's a story told of the Brisker Rav, who, when he saw the Rogachover, after he published this treatment on the topic of marriage, the Brisker Rav says to the Rogachover, Mazel Tov. Mm-hmm. So the Rogachover is a little puzzled, and he says, well, according to your explanation of the nature of Kiddushin, today is the day of your chasana. Today is the day you got married, because it's not constantly happening. So he says to him, Mazel Tov. Now, the reason I tell this story is because if we go back and understand if this is one way of understanding marriage between a husband and a wife here on earth and the human relationship, so then that means it's ultimately a manifestation of the same phenomenon taking place on high, in the spiritual marriage between God and the soul. This marriage, too, between God and the soul, is also in constant renewal. You have a question?
Okay, I got a question then. Okay, well, my soul yearns. Is this the same as when, you go to sleep at night and your soul leaves and returns to God? Is that the same type of
same
yearning?
Kind? Exactly. Okay. That's the kind of a certain slice of the fulfillment of that yearning. Okay. Now, so God Himself and the Jewish people have an opportunity to constantly deepen the relationship, constantly sanctify the relationship, and this idea of a constantly renewed marriage. So that we see in the words of the Alter Rebbe in the next slide. Now this slide is from Tanya, recorded before from Likutei Torah. Now we're quoting from the Tanya, the fundamental work of Chabad Hasidic philosophy, and it's broken up into multiple sections. The first section is called Likutei Amarim, and the 46th chapter of Likutei Amarim in Tanya, the English translation reads, "For the Holy One, blessed be He, forsakes the higher and lower creatures, choosing none of them but Israel, His people." Talking about this marriage. Now, this choice is in order to bring them near to Him in true closeness and unity, with a truly soulful attachment on the level of kisses of mouth to mouth. Which, if you remember, when we quoted from Shir Shirim, was how King Solomon describes it as well. This relationship of the soul to God is kisses. So this unique attachment is achieved by means of uttering the word of God. So you know how to give God a kiss? Learn Torah. Namely, the halachas of Torah, the laws, and the fusion of spirit to spirit. How to go even deeper than mouth to mouth, spirit to spirit. That is the comprehension of the Torah and the knowledge of His will and wisdom, all of which is truly one with God. We can also unite with God with a form of embrace, namely the fulfillment of the positive precepts with our bodies. So we have three amazing things here in Tanya. You want to kiss God? Say words of Torah. If you want to be in a soulful connection with God, understand the teachings of Torah. If you want to give God a hug, do a mitzvah. And this then, the Alter Rebbe continues, this then is the meaning of the text of the blessings, Asher Kiddishanu b'mitzvayso, who has sanctified us by his commandments. For instance, so the mitzvah, like one who betroths a wife, that she may be united with him with a perfect bond, as it is written, and he shall cleave to his wife, and they shall be one flesh. So exactly so, and even infinitely surpassing it, is the union of the divine soul that is occupied in Torah and commandments, and of the vivifying soul in their garments referred to above with the light of God. You have this dynamic going back to the higher level of God and the soul, and understanding it in the metaphor of a marriage. When we got married is when God gave the Torah. That was the betrothal. The way we fulfill the marriage, the way we deepen the bond constantly, is by making it a holy bond. How do we make it holy? By words of Torah, by understanding Torah, by taking the Torah we learn and learning the mitzvahs, and by fulfilling the mitzvahs. That is how we're constantly renewing the marriage and deepening this holy bond and holy relationship that we have with God. All right. So I told you we're going to get deep into understanding the metaphor. We still have our question on the table, though, about marriage buried, or so to say, hidden within the context of divorce. And in the Mishnah, where marriage comes after the topic of divorce. So we have to go a step farther. We've already gone quite far, quite deep to understand what is marriage all about. It's the physical manifestation of the spiritual source, the spiritual cause of the bonding of God and the soul. But once we're married to God, our marriage to God should be governed, if it's the source for the laws of the Torah of marriage between man and a woman, it should be governed by the same laws that the Torah provides for a conventional marriage. And one of the most fundamental laws of marriage is that it has to be consensual. A husband can't force the wife to marry him. That's the next text, next couple texts. The next text is from Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law, the Even HaEzer, which is the section where we have the laws of marriage, the 42nd chapter over there. And it says, a woman can only be betrothed by her will. One who betroths a woman against her will, she is not betrothed. This is another fundamental principle. I'm throwing out a few of these tonight. But another fundamental principle in the Torah is that God plays by his own rules. If he gives us a rule in Torah, we have the concept that he also does the same thing. So now that we've established this mirror-like relationship between the supernal marriage of God and the soul and the terrestrial marriage between man and a woman, then if God's playing by his own rules, then the rules that apply to a man and a woman apply to God as well. So he can't force us to be married to him. So we have to accept it. It has to be willing. And that's where we go back again to the giving of the Torah on Mount Sinai. God offered us the Torah. He didn't compel us to take it. And how do we know that the Jewish people were willing to take the Torah? When they said, Naaseh v'nishma. When they said, we'll do it and we'll understand it, and they were accepting the Torah, that was accepting of the marriage. That's the next text. Oh, sorry, text 11. I got to go back one. So text 11 is from Likutei Sichos. This is the source of tonight's class. It's a teaching of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, which can be found in its written form in the book Likutei Sichos, volume 9. So the Lubavitcher Rebbe explains in there that Sicha, it says that the betrothal ceremony between God and the Jewish people at the giving of the Torah, God revealed his intense love for the Jewish people, and this in turn aroused in the Jews an intense love for God. And this love is finding expression in their full-hearted acceptance of the Torah and their proclamation, Naaseh v'nishma. We will do and we will listen. And through the revelation of his love, God achieved that the Jews should want to be betrothed to him. So God started it, by offering us the Torah and giving us the opportunity, and we responded willingly by saying, Na'aseh v'nishma. Okay, so in section 2, what we've established in section 2, first in section 1, we set up our question, right? We set up our question, which is that in this week's Torah portion, we learned about divorce, and the rabbis derive from the verses about divorce, using a Gezer Shava, the rabbis derive the laws for marriage. So that's our question. Why should you hide marriage in such a coded way when the topic of divorce? We found the same kind of question when it comes to learning Mishnah, the code of Jewish law, the first codification of the oral tradition. So the codification, we see that in the organization of the laws of marriage, marriage comes after the laws of divorce. Kedushin comes after Gittin. So we have the same kind of question. Why is it this way? Why should marriage come only after divorce? We gave a few answers, and we said according to Chassidus, after our first few more legal kind of answers, it came according to Chassidus and said, in order to understand why marriage should be hidden inside the text of divorce, why the tractate of marriage should come after the tractate of divorce, is that you have to first understand what is marriage and divorce. Marriage and divorce is really the manifestation of a much higher spiritual cause. A much higher spiritual cause is the bond between God and the soul. That's the marriage we're talking about. And that bond between God and the soul, that is the source for marriage here on earth between man and a woman. Once we've established that in section number 2, that's when we're going to be able to move on and explain the meaning of divorce in this context of a celestial marriage between God and the soul. All right, any questions so far? Any questions from home?
If there is a divorce between the Jewish people and God, who would initiate it?
Good question. So, Tanya, you asked this question now, so you have the answer. You could answer, David. What's the
Who
answer?
initiated the divorce?
Yeah.
God.
Okay, because God's the husband
Yes,
in the relationship. And the verses that explain this week's Torah portion, the mitzvah of divorce, it has to be initiated officially by the husband.
But it's never happened? Is that what we say?
If what's never happened?
God's never divorced the Jewish people? I mean, like with the flood, that was before they were called Jews. They were just
right.
people.
It's a good question.
And there wasn't a marriage up till that point.
Right. It's exactly what we're up to. It's a perfect question. It's right on point.
Because in one of the minor prophets, it speaks of a husband and a wife. She's a harlot, and he divorced. Well, he lets her go, but he keeps taking her back.
Okay, so you said it perfectly. The only thing I would contest is that the prophet's minor. But,
Hosea or something.
But you made a beautiful point. But I see we have a question from home. Let's take a quick look. Oh, just everybody's all set with the volume and everything. Great. All right. So, what is the divorce? Perfect questions, perfect lead in to the very next text, because if we see the very next text, Prophet Jeremiah, or Yirmiyahu, in the 3rd chapter of Yirmiyahu, the 8th verse. It's actually something we just read as a Haftarah recently in Shul. In the Shabbos is between the 3 weeks, and Rosh Hashanah, we call them the 7 Haftarahs of consolation. Shivat Nechemta. So these 7 Haftarahs of consolation, we have the idea of after the 3 weeks of difficulty between 17th of Tammuz and 9th of Av. So we have a bunch of them from Jeremiah, Yirmiyahu. So in the 3rd chapter over there, now, before I read this, the headline of when is this divorce, the headline of this divorce is exile. We've been in seemingly an estranged relationship with God since the exile and with the destruction of the temple.
Sort of like a separation instead of a divorce.
Yeah. Now, we're going to see that some texts refer to it directly as a divorce.
Okay.
But then we're going to answer up how it's impossible to be divorced. That's going to be the big punchline at the end, but I'll give it away now. But the idea is that if the marriage is the Jewish people and God with the giving of the Torah, And the way that we, according to this, we said the way that we fulfill the marriage is by learning Torah and doing the mitzvahs, by being by merit or by virtue of the fact that the temple was destroyed and the Jewish people were exiles from the land. We've talked about how that leaves less than a third of the mitzvahs left for us to do. So yeah, it's at the very least a serious separation, because most of the mitzvahs we can't do now without the temple and without the land of Israel. So let's see how this works. Text 12, the book of Jeremiah, the book of Yirmiyahu, it says, "And I saw, because of all that backsliding for which Israel had committed adultery." So we're extending the metaphor of marriage. The Jewish people committed adultery, they cheated on God. "I sent her away, and I gave her a bill of divorcement. Yet treacherous Yehuda, the Jewish people, her sister did not fear, and she too went and played the harlot." So here we have seemingly all the elements, right? God, the husband, gives the get to the Jewish people. And what's the reason for it? We cheated on God with all the idolatry in the land of Israel. And so as a result of that, we have exile. Now the Medrash comes right out with it and makes it explicit in its explanation. Medrash explains, "I brought them into the land of Israel, as it is stated, and I brought them into the land of Carmel. And then I instructed them with mitzvahs, as it is stated, speak to the children of Israel. Yet they violated my command, as it is stated, and all of Israel violated your Torah. I judged them with a bill of divorce, as it is stated, I banished them from my house. And I further judged them with eviction, as it is stated, cast them away from before me, and they will leave. And I lamented over them, as it is stated, oh, how Jerusalem remained lonely." So you have, yeah, go ahead.
I don't know where I saw it. It might be in Esau, but somewhere doesn't it say, "Where is the bill of divorcement?" As if to say, I never said I was going to do it.
Yeah, and that's going to be one of the texts here tonight as well.
Coming up?
Yeah, it's coming up. Very good. No, you're doing great. You jumped right in, and you're swimming right on topic. Now, so here, before we go any further, here it seems clear from the book of Yirmiyahu and from the Medrash, there was a divorce. And the divorce is understood as exile. Why are we sent in exile? Because God got rid of us. God divorced us and got rid of us. Now, one of the laws, and this is where we're going to get the technicality, the technicality of how it's impossible to be divorced. One of the laws of divorce, again, reiterating that God follows all the laws, that's one of the principles. So God has to follow the laws of divorce. So one of the laws of divorce is that the husband has to give the get to his wife. Now, there is a transfer of the get. So there's a lot of analysis. How does this work exactly? But essentially what it has to be is the husband has to have the get, knowingly. Then there has to be an exchange from the husband to the wife. And there has to be like a separation from one owner or possessor of the get to the next.
Is that why the comment in there earlier that said, "and put in her hand"?
Yeah. That's right.
Okay.
So a husband can't keep it and say, "Oh, this get's for my wife," and then she doesn't get it, and then she's divorced. Or the other way around, if the wife makes the get for herself and the didn't come from the husband, that's also not a divorce.
Is that why they can't get remarried to the same person?
Well, no. In that case, there was if there's a marriage in between, you can't get remarried. If there's no marriage in between, then you could get remarried. Now, so the get has to leave the possession of the husband and then become into the ultimate or absolute possession of the wife. So that we see in the next text. This is from Maimonides, his code of Jewish law, Mishnah Torah, and it's in the laws of divorce, chapter 1, and then 2 of the different laws, so law number 1 and law number 3. So the Rambam explains a woman may be divorced only by receiving a bill of divorce. This bill is called a get. The Torah establishes 10 principles as fundamental for the divorce to be effective, and then it lists the principles. Now, the verse states, this is in the 3rd law there, the verse states a bill of divorce. which means a deed that severs the relationship between the husband and his wife, without leaving him any jurisdiction over her. If the relationship between them is not entirely severed, the divorce is not effective, as will be explained. Now the verse states further, he will place it in her hand, right? That was all the way back to text number 1. This teaches that she is not divorced until the bill of divorce is placed in her hand, in the hand of her agent, which is considered also to be her hand, or in her domain, which is considered to be her hand, as all of these things will be explained as the Rambam continues in his laws. But what's introduced, at least, from these 2 laws that we read briefly from, is that if the get left the possession of the husband and reached to his wife, if there remains a possibility for a husband to retrieve the get, then she's not divorced. It's only once the transfer is complete that you have a full divorce. But if the transfer is incomplete and the husband has a chance to get it back, then it's not a divorce. That's the next law in the Rambam. Jumping ahead a few chapters and a few halachos in the chapter. Chapter 5, halacha 16 of Mishnah Torah, the Rambam explains the following rules apply when a husband throws a get. Here's where I say he really gets into lots of details, but listen to this. A husband throws the wife a get, but the get is tied with a string. It's like a cartoon. His wife's hand, she has the get, and he remains holding the other end of the string. So if he can pull the get from her hand with the string and bring it back to him, then the divorce is not effective until he snaps the string. If he cannot pull the get from her, that's when the divorce is effective. So you need a separation, a clean break, no way for the husband to take the get back. If he has a way to take it back, deal with like a string here is the way, the mechanism to get it back, the way the Rambam's explaining it, then the divorce is not final. So that leads us to a big philosophical question, because how is it possible for God to divorce the Jewish people by giving them a get? Because nothing leaves his possession. Yeah. One of the fundamentals of our faith is that God fills the entire world. The entire world is filled with his glory. So if there's no place devoid of his presence, then there's no clean break between him and his get.
But isn't that like, in order for there to be light in the world, or for there to be the world, he had to withdraw his presence to some extent so that there would be room for that. Is that on that same category?
Perfect, exactly. But then the question will be then, to extend that philosophical question, is it possible for God to conceal his presence completely?
Right.
Or, as we're going to answer, is it just an apparent concealment to us, but the reality is that he's there all along? So, the next slide kind of lays it out. Divorce, according to the text of Jeremiah, the text of Yirmiyahu, the text of the Medrash, divorce is really the time of exile. That's the way it's understood on the surface level. But our question is, how can God ever truly banish the get from his possession if he's everywhere? And the answer being is that since God is everywhere, it's impossible for him to follow this halacha, and we can never be truly divorced. Never finalize the divorce because we never take full possession of something because it never leaves his possession. So exile really isn't a divorce because God can't divorce his people. So effectively, God faked a divorce. And it's a long-term separation, let's say. But it's only the way it is apparent to us. The true reality is that because God's presence is everywhere, exile, the divorce, isn't real. It's just the way it appears to us. So the Rebbe continues with this idea. This is back to the Likkutei Sichos that we quoted earlier. Says their husband is very distant. Exile feels pretty real to us, right? It feels real. Yeah. I'm telling you, exile is not real, but it sure feels like it. The husband is very distant. As it states, God has departed to the higher realms. And he's not found here in the lower realms like he was revealed in the temple. And this status leads us to the idea of a divorce between God and the Jews. However, the notion that God departed from the world is only in a revealed sense. In the true sense of reality, God never departed. It turns out that in the inner dimension, God really can't divorce the Jews after all. Chas v'shalom. God forbid. So this brings us to our answer for tonight's class. The answer to our question, what was our question? Why is marriage, hidden in a coded way in the topic of divorce? That's in the Torah portion. Why in the Mishnah does the laws of divorce precede the laws of marriage? So now that we've come to this understanding, this level of understanding according to Chassidus, we now have a very powerful message. We have a powerful answer to this question. The answer is that the marriage is always hidden in the divorce. The Torah is starting from the very beginning to tell us, from the giving of the Torah, the very beginning of the marriage, it tells us that even in divorce, you're always married. You want to know what the true nature of our marriage is, the bond between God and the Jewish people? The real, deep, powerful message is that even when it seems like a divorce, even when it seems like God is hiding, God's presence is always within the concealment of this world. It's the time when it seems to us that God's hiding the most, He's always there. The next text, as the Rebbe continues, that the idea of unity that is prevalent in the get, right? This idea of marriage, which is found in the get, in contrast to its inherent nature of division, expresses itself in the association of divorce with marriage. Indeed, we find that the legal basis for marriage is derived from the verses that speak of divorce. This, then, is the reason why the order of tractates has Kedushin after Gittin. To hint to the fact that even after the divorce, the woman is once again betrothed to her husband in an unbreakable and intrinsic connection. In other words, even though in our current exile it appears that we're divorced from God, we always remain married. We always enjoy this special relationship in a tangible way. The divorce-like state of exile is only an illusion. And it's always followed by the promise of an everlasting marriage. And that's why the Torah teaches us marriage through divorce. It teaches that the divorce is never real.
Sort of like absence makes the heart grow fonder. You have to not have something, understand not having something to understand the depth of having something.
Right. Or I'll say it another way. Remember when one of the answers we gave was why is divorce coming from marriage? So it's like, that's the best way to make the marriage work. Right. So now you can invert that and say the only way to make this exile work is to realize God's here all along.
Right. And you'll ultimately get out of it.
Yeah. The only way to bear the apparent sense of divorce is to realize that you're always married to God all along. So we find an idea like this expressed in the Torah, the book of Isaiah. It says, "So said God." This is what you were talking about before, David. "So said God" in the book of Isaiah, "Where is your mother's bill of divorce that I sent her away? Or who is it of my creditors to whom I sold you? Behold, for your iniquities you were sold, and for your transgressions your mother was sent away." That's where he's saying, show me the get. If you think you're divorced, show me the get. Now, that's what the next text in the Metzudas David is one of the primary commentaries of the books of the Bible. He says that this bill of divorce is only temporary, and it was an external state that was dependent on our behavior. That's text 16b, the last slide of the night, or the last text slide of the night. "Though it is true that God indeed has given the Jews a bill of divorce, as the verse stated clearly, and I gave her a bill of divorce. However, as the verse here states, where is your mother's bill of divorce that I sent her away?" So on the one hand, we have a verse saying, I gave it to you. And then the next verse is questioning it, saying, where is it? The Metzudas David explains, in other words, let us see within the writ why I sent her away. Wasn't it on account of her sins, as is written here? And therefore, when you will repent, the divorce is uprooted. So that's really the motivation which comes out from the realization that God is always here. you may be facing these difficult times, the difficulties of gullus, the painful darkness of gullus, which seems like a divorce. When the Torah teaches us marriage in this coded way within the text of divorce, the way Chassidus explains, the way we learned here tonight, in order to give us the strength of realization that God's always with us, where the marriage is always there. And what that realization empowers in us, the way this last text is explaining, is the deep drive for tshuva. The deep drive to realize that the reason we think we're divorced is because of our own shortcomings. It's not, God never left us. That's what Isaiah is saying. I never left you. The reason you have a get is because what you did. So the realization that Chassidus explains that even when it seems like we're divorced, we're always married, and God's always with us, that empowers, that motivates us to fix the problem, to fix the cause of this sense of concealment. The cause of the sense of concealment is our own shortcomings.
So with him with pulling the string, that's us repenting.
Yeah, that motivates us to repent. And then we have a question over here. How do the non-Jews factor into Hashem's love, and does their soul share a bond with Hashem? Yes. So the answer is that the non-Jews factor into Hashem's love, kind of the point of God giving all of this connection and Torah and mitzvahs and things to the Jewish people in order for them to be a light unto the nations. The idea is that really God wants this deep bond with all of creation. And he gave both the power as well as the responsibility to the Jewish people through the giving of the Torah on Mount Sinai to first live out that connection on their terms, come to it and do their work. And part of that work is to take that message and spread it to the entire world. So that's how the non-Jews factor into it, is that really God loves all of his creation. And the point of giving the Torah on Mount Sinai to the Jewish people is that they should be a light unto the nations and bring all of mankind into this bond with God. And as it says over here, this connection is always whole and always, the bond is always strong. Yeah. Although the image doesn't look so good because
right there.
yeah, that link looks tenuous, right? All right. Any questions?
That's good.
Wow, it's interesting.
Yeah.
Different stuff.
Actually, approach from where you started to.
Yeah.
So you almost have to play like Sherlock Holmes to connect the dots,
Yeah.
but they're connected.
They come back together.
Yeah.
All right. And I think we have one. This has all been part of the Jewish Onion.
Oh.
Good deal.
Very good. All right.
Good class.
Stop sharing. Close this. Stop the meeting.
What do we got next week?
Next week is, I think we're going to start the Rosh Hashanah series next week, if I'm not mistaken. Really long out. Exit, there we go.
Is that a new semester?
No, this semester goes